Hey, look, I'm going to be honest with you before we start. There will be some things in this podcast which you will consider graphic. I will swear. I will use sexual terms. I will even describe horrific events in detail. So hey, I'm just warning you. If it's not your thing, I won't be offended. Turn it off. Turn it off right now. Go. On you go. Right, be off with you. Go. Okay. Now that we've got that out of the way, if you're still listening, hey, how are you? It moves all the time. It cannot stop. If it stops, everything in it will die, and it's dark at night, and it sparkles when the sun is dancing. But there's a great hole in the bottom of it, and no one knows about it. Keep it a secret, Barry. Don't tell anyone. If I fell in, I'd probably meet a crab and he'd save me. People think it's blue, but actually, it's green. I'm just saying, I think that's what it's like. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hi, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. So what you just heard before that was the answer I got when I asked a 7-year-old I was working with this week, what do you think the sea is like? I had no intro text for the podcast this week. I hadn't written anything. And so I thought, do you know what? I'll ask a 7-year-old. Because you know what? You're always going to get a good answer out of them. This week I'm looking at 3 stories. A family tragedy, a brutal death, and an incredible survival. All at sea. Before I start, 2 very quick shout outs. I want to say hello to Lucy Irwin and Mirella Simpson. Hello. And all of the new Facebook group members, welcome along. And the new Patreon supporters, your generosity is very much appreciated. Okay, this is episode 27, so we're hurtling through. Episode 30 is approaching fast, and for that I'm going to be doing a special episode. I really hope when I get there that you're going to love it. It's different from what the episodes normally are. I mean, it's not too different. It's still a story. I still consider it to be extraordinary. I'll not say too much more, but hopefully episode 30 will be with you soon. Okay, that's enough from me. On with the stories. Okay, let's go. John Shackalose, 87, beloved husband of the late Rita Shackalose, passed away unexpectedly at his home in Windsor on December 20th, 2013. John was born June 29th, 1926 in New Hampshire, the only son in a family of 5 daughters. John enlisted in the US Army as a private, where he served with distinction as a paratrooper in the Philippines during World War II. During his high school years in Middletown, John met his sweetheart, Rita Baranowski. The two were married for 59 years, until Rita lost her battle with cancer in 2013. John dedicated his life to his marriage, his work, and the community. But above all, family. His favourite motto was, without family, you've got nothing. Family is everything. He showered his grandchildren, his nieces, his nephews with paternal love. John was a proud, hard-working man, and with his determination and his work ethic, he built a beautiful life for his family. A self-made man, John proudly worked full-time as a real estate developer until the day of his passing. He never slowed down, always exhibiting a larger-than-life personality. Behind a strong-willed business demeanour lay a heart of gold. John and Rita felt an obligation to give to those who were less fortunate, especially to children who needed it. Despite his personal and professional successes, John carried a special humility and compassion, always reaching out to those in need, often anonymously. He will be remembered by thousands for his acts of kindness and his generosity. That was John Shackalow's obituary. So let's just recap what we learned from that. Okay, so John and Rita Shackalow's were high school sweethearts and they married in 1954. Both were born and raised in New Hampshire and they enjoyed a really happy family life in which they had 3 children. So John was first in the army and then he was a real estate developer. So they'd worked hard their whole entire lives. John was, as it said in the obituary, he was a man who was determined to do well by his family. He wanted to give them a really comfortable life. They were famous, in inverted commas, famous in New Hampshire because they had this 80-acre estate, and every Christmas they would have an extremely extravagant Christmas display and something that they would then open up to everyone from miles around to come and see. Every year they would get this, 6 million lights up on their 80-acre farm. So they'd have these huge displays, massive Santas, big fairy lights, all the trees decorated, every kind of Christmas light, every Christmas decoration under the sun. 6 million lights, that is a lot. I mean, I get seriously frustrated trying to untangle one set of fairy lights that's like about a metre long. I end up throwing it off the wall in frustration. 6 million, I can't imagine. So there was like a 20-foot Santa Claus, and they built like an entire Victorian village and decorated it in all these Christmas decorations. So they would open this up and people would come, and they didn't ask people to pay. What they did was they asked for people to donate to the local food bank so that people who didn't have access to food could eat during the Christmas season. So sadly, it was just a few days before Thanksgiving in 2013 when Rita lost her battle with cancer. So that year, not long, probably like a month after it, the Christmas celebration was coming around, and John thought, no, do you know what? We've done this all of our lives. I'm going to carry on with it. I'm going to carry on, and this is going to help me mourn the death of Rita. So there was a special dedication to Rita included in this year's Christmas celebrations. So a tough time ahead for the family. They're about to face their first Christmas without their mother, without Rita. But something else is about to happen that's going to make that Christmas even worse. On December 21st, 2013, a second tragedy hits. The death of John. The first line of the obituary that I read said the words, "Passed away unexpectedly." What does this really mean? John's body had been found in his home by one of his daughters. He'd been shot in the back of the head twice at close range, and he had been shot once in the chest. John's death was a cold-blooded murder. Now, John had no known enemies, and a detailed and a thorough investigation took place, but it turned up very little in the way of evidence. Police examined every possible theory. Had someone broken in and attempted to rob the 87-year-old? Well, it's an idea, but there was no sign of a break-in, and there was really no sign of a robbery. Nothing in the property was taken. No signs of forced entry. The gunshots, they look as if John hadn't been facing his attacker. The attacker had come from behind, 2 shots to the back of the head. Police considered very briefly whether or not John had, very briefly they considered this, had John taken his own life? Was he so overcome by grief, about losing Rita? But very quickly they determined no, it's not possible by the angle of the shots. So there were billboards put up everywhere offering huge sums of money in return for any information about John's death. The family were offering up to $250,000 for any information that anyone might have that might help them solve what happened to John. So where does this leave the murder of John? Well, at the moment, unsolved. Possibly unsolved. So I mentioned earlier that John had money. John had amassed a great fortune in his life. And in the event of his death, there were plenty people in his family and in his life who were set to gain a lot of money. As an example of this, each of his 3 daughters would receive a fortune of $21 million each after his death. Fuck me, that's some amount of money. Whoa, $21 million each. So you might be thinking, hang on, I thought this episode was about the sea. I don't get the connection. Well, okay, let's zoom out and we'll look at another family member. This is someone we need to talk about. Let's talk about Linda, his 54-year-old daughter. Linda was married and she had 1 son called Nathan. Her married name was Carmen. She was married to a man called Clark. So Linda and her son Nathan, he was 23 at the time when John died. They are keen fishers. So they go out once a week on a boat fishing. It's a sort of mother-son bonding experience. I think it's something that they've done since he was young and it's something that they really enjoy to do. So they have a boat which is called Chicken Pox. What a great name for a boat. Why would you call a boat Chicken Pox? I don't know. So they head out and this is 2017 by this point. So this is 4 years after John's death. Police have decided they can't figure out who it is that's murdered John. They've tried everything. They've exhausted every lead that they have. It's becoming a cold case. They're not arriving at any answers, and so it's sitting as a sort of cold case file at the moment. So here we are, we're 4 years later. Linda, his daughter, and Nathan, his grandson, are out fishing. Something goes horribly, horribly wrong when they are out on this regular fishing trip. The boat runs into trouble and it begins to sink. When Linda and Nathan don't return home, husband Clark raises the alarm. He is panicked. He's used to them going out every week on these fishing trips, and they're always back roughly at the same time, and this one day they've not come back, and he's alarmed. So the Coast Guard begins a search. Everyone in the family, all the friends that they have, they're all involved in the search for Chicken Pox, the boat, and for Linda and Nathan. Days pass and nothing. After 6 days, the Coast Guard calls off the search and they're presumed dead. Clark is obviously devastated to have lost his wife and his son in this way. 8 days after they had gone out fishing, Nathan is found. He is discovered floating in an inflatable raft by fishermen who bring him to shore. However, there is no sign of Linda, and Linda is presumed dead. So what does Nathan say happened? Well, he says there was a strange noise coming from the engine on the boat. So he says he goes to investigate the noise, and there's smoke coming from the engine. He says at this point he instructs his mother to move away from the engine, gather up their belongings, because he believes they're going to have to get off this boat quickly. Next thing he knows, he says the boat is sinking. He gets to a life raft, and he says at this point he just doesn't see his mother anymore. So he gets into the life raft, and then all of a sudden, it's days later, and he's found. In the first call that he has with anyone after he's been in the sea for all this time, he asks if his mother has been found.
Nathan, this is United States Coast Guard Boston. I need to understand what happened.
Mom and I, two people, myself and my mom, were fishing at Block Canyon, and there was a funny noise in the engine compartment. When I saw the life raft, I did not see my mom. Have you found her?
No, we haven't been able to find her yet.
So, a real tragedy for this family here. So as I said, there was 3 daughters. So John, who we talked about earlier, John had 3 daughters. So the 2 remaining, they've lost their mother, they've lost their father, now they've lost their sister. All really within a few years of each other. And 2 of them, John and Linda, in the most horrible ways. One murdered, one drowned at sea. Now, what are you thinking at this point? Are you thinking, well, odd things happen, but that's just life? Or are you thinking there's maybe some reasons to look a little bit further into Linda's disappearance and the sinking boat? Was that really just an accident? John's 2 remaining daughters, they were certainly beginning to think something. They were beginning to believe that there was one person in common, linked to both of these circumstances. And this someone police needed to look at. And that was Nathan. They start thinking how odd it is that Nathan survived this accident at sea and that Linda didn't. The more they think about it, they go back in their minds to the murder of their father, and they start to realise something which sets massive alarm bells ringing in their head. They realise Nathan was the last person to ever see John alive. He'd been at his grandfather's house the night before. He'd been for dinner the night before the body was discovered. He had dinner, he left. The following day, John was found dead. Then they look at the money that Nathan was set to inherit. In the event of Linda's death, Nathan would receive a cool $7 million of his grandfather's money. Now, he didn't receive this when his grandfather died. This was put into a trust for him. Linda would have to be dead before that $7 million would come to Nathan. So what do we have? The case of a murderous family member who's killed his grandfather and then his mother in order to get some money. Well, the family certainly seem to think so. They go to police, and police, they take this seriously. They start to think, yeah, you're right, there is something in this. This is all adding up to something. So an investigation begins into Nathan. The FBI become involved. The Coast Guard runs a whole separate investigation into the remains of the boat, which they eventually find. All of them looking for signs of foul play. Amongst Nathan's property, they find a gun, they find ammunition, but they have a really hard time matching it to the gun that was used to kill John. The investigation goes on for months, but eventually they have to drop the investigation. There's just not enough evidence. It doesn't stop the rest of the family. The lack of evidence does not say to them that Nathan isn't guilty. They go to the courts and they ask that Nathan not be allowed access to any of the money in his inheritance. If they are successful, and this is still going through the courts now, but if they are successful, Nathan will never see a penny of the money that was left to him. His father Clark says, "I wish everyone would just leave this alone," because he was not involved in his grandfather's death or with his mother's disappearance. He would never do anything like that. He's a good kid. He loved his grandfather. I know my son, and he is not capable of this. As it stands right now, Nathan is no longer being investigated, and the deaths of John and his daughter Linda remain a mystery. So what do you think? What are your thoughts? Let me know. I'm on the there's no smoke without fire sort of track with this. I just think when it comes to family, this is what I think's interesting, is that the entire rest of the family are so convinced that he's involved. I just think when a whole entire family feels like that, there's something there that makes you have to sort of sit up and listen. And I know that police did, and it's just that there wasn't enough evidence. But yeah, I'd love to know. I'd love to know what you think about this. Okay, that ends Sea Story number 1. Alright, story 2. Now, I will say this is an actual warning, not a piss-takey warning in the way that my explicit one was at the beginning. I found this story, I just found it really upsetting. I found it horrible. After I'd looked at it and I'd done all the research and I'd decided what I wanted to say about it, and yeah, I don't know, I just had to sort of spend 5 minutes like just staring at a wall, listening to some music and just thinking, sometimes humanity is just shit. But anyway, I hope that you will like the story, and I think it's an important one to tell. Okay, it's the story of Diane Brimble. So Diane Brimble was a mother who had decided that she wanted to go on a cruise around the South Pacific. She wanted to take her daughter. She'd saved for 2 years to take this trip. The fare, if I can remember off the top of my head, I think it was close to $5,000 to take this trip. So she'd worked hard, she'd saved hard. And although she was a mother of 3, she actually could only afford to really take her youngest daughter, Talia, with her. But it was going to be the trip of a lifetime for Diane and her daughter. And so she was really looking forward to it. On September 23rd, 2002, she boarded the P&O Pacific Sky. She departed from Sydney, Australia. Diane and Talia, they boarded the ship along with Diane's sister Alma and Alma's daughter Carrie Ann. So all 4 of them had planned to share a cabin for the 10-day trip. So they set off on their cruise, and Diane and her family, they enjoyed a sail away party. So this gave them a chance to kind of relax, have a few cocktails, watch the sun go down, and just generally relax into the fact that they were on this cruise. So following the party, they went for dinner, and they talked about plans for the following day. They got really excited discussing things that they were going to do on board the cruise ship. And, you know, they were just talking about how excited they were that the weather forecast was good, and they were just looking forward to generally relaxing and all the things that they were going to do. So after the dinner, the 4 of them, they decide to head back to the cabin and call it an early night. But Diane, somewhere along the way, she changes her mind and she thinks, no, I think I'll stay up for a while. She wants to let her hair down. She wants to relax. She wants to party a little. Absolutely fine. So Diane accompanies everyone back to the cabin that they're staying in. She kisses her daughter Talia goodnight, And then she heads to the cruise ship's nightclub. So she's in the ship's nightclub called Starlight. She meets a man called Mark Wilhelm. Now, Mark was part of a group of 8 men, all from Adelaide in Australia, who were travelling together on the cruise ship. They were, I think, reported to be part of some sort of a bike gang in Adelaide. So there's 8 of these guys all travelling together. So there she is. She's in the Starlight club on the cruise. She's having a few drinks. She's dancing. She's having a really good time. So she's met Mark, and they share a few drinks. They're talking. They're laughing. He asks her if she wants to come back to his cabin, and she agrees. So the cabin that he is in, it's got 4 beds in it, 2 sets of bunk beds. So he was sharing that with 3 of the male friends that he was with. So when they get back, the 3 male friends are asleep in the cabin. So their names are Mr. Silvestri, Mr. Kuchel, and Mr. Slade. So they're already asleep. Once inside, Diane has sex with Mark Wilhelm, and the noise, it eventually wakes up the other 3 men. So one of them, Mr. Kuchel, he will later remember that he hears his friend Mark Wilhelm offering Diane a drug, saying to her, "It'll make you 10 times hornier." She asks in reply, "Is it dangerous?" And he says, "No." It's reported that she also wakes up one of the other men, Mr. Silvestri, and at this point she gives him a blowjob. Now, it's never clear if this was a threesome, foursome situation. It's never quite ever fully explained. It's certainly hinted at. It's certainly in the background of a lot of things that you will read, or a lot of the things that you might see about this case. It's never explicitly named whether or not this was a sort of group sex situation. It's certainly true that she did have sex with Mark Wilhelm, and that she did give the other guy a blowjob. Now, the following morning, Diane's sister Alma realised that Diane had not returned to their cabin. Alma starts to become concerned. So she thinks, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to report that she's not returned. So they try to find Diane, but they can't. They page her, but there's no reply. Shortly after this, Alma would be called by the ship's medical team and asked to come in and speak to them. And it's here that she's given the horrific news that her sister has passed away. Alma's not told how this has happened. She's simply told the words, "passed away." Diane's naked body had been found on the floor of the cabin that she'd visited the night before. So the cruise continues for 2 more days. Diane's daughter Talia, her sister, her niece, they are forced to endure these couple of days before they could disembark and fly back to Australia. Can you imagine just how horrible that must have been for her sister? In shock, grieving, complete disbelief. She's gone on this cruise. Her sister's dead. And with her, she's got Diane's youngest child. She's got Talia. And she has to explain to her why her mum hasn't come back. But also, she doesn't really know why she's not come back, because she's just being told she passed away. So as they are disembarking from the boat, Diane's sister sees detectives arrive, and she starts to become suspicious. She starts to think this is to do with the circumstances of how Diane has died. So it takes a number of weeks which must have just been agony. It takes weeks. But eventually, the family discover that Diane had consumed a large amount of GHB. So that's the date rape drug. It's also known as liquid fantasy. A coroner's inquest began in Sydney in 2006. The investigation into Diane's death was to uncover a number of dreadful circumstances surrounding Diane's death. It's come to light through the investigation that Mark Wilhelm was photographed on the night that it happened. By who? I don't know. But he was photographed wandering naked up and down the corridor of the cruise ship, wearing only a life jacket. He and his 3 friends, remember I said there was a group of 8 of them, that same night, the same night that Diane died, they had approached another cabin, and this cabin was full of young women. And they approached this cabin and they proposed sex. But these girls, they refused. They said, no thanks, not interested. These girls then said at this point, Mark Wilhelm took out his phone and he showed photographs to them of him having sex with Diane from only an hour earlier. She was lying dead in their cabin and he was showing photographs of him having sex with her. Some of the young women who at first refused this group of guys, they changed their minds stupidly, so fucking stupidly, changed their minds and decided, yeah, we will come back to your cabin, yeah, we will come back and have a bit of sex. But when they opened the door, they saw Diane's body lying on the floor and they got out of there as quickly as they possibly could. Why they didn't go and report that at that point, I have no idea, but they just got out of there. So Mark Wilhelm, he panicked at the sight of Diane's body. I don't think he knew that she was dead at this point. He knew she was lying on the floor of the cabin when he went looking for sex with other girls on the cruise ship. But I don't know that he knew that she was dead. So in a panic, he picks her up, he puts her under a shower, but he realises this is having no effect. She's not breathing. So it's at this point he contacts the ship's medical centre. It took 6 years for the men involved in this to be arrested and charged in connection with her death. 6 long years. I cannot believe it took that length of time. It's unbelievable. The family must have been tearing their hair out at this point. But it took 6 years because the inquest, yes, it was clear that she had this liquid fantasy drug in her system. But what was unclear was whether she had willingly taken it or had she actually been given it by Mark Wilhelm. Had she been given it in such quantities that when mixed with alcohol, it had actually killed her. Allegations were made in court when the men were eventually taken to court that some had provided the drugs while others had taken photographs of her having sex and taken photographs of her when she was unconscious and possibly dying. So Wilhelm, Kuchel and Silvestri, the 3 men in the cabin, they were charged. A charge of manslaughter against Wilhelm was later dropped. It was too difficult to prove that he had given Diane this date rape drug in lethal quantities. Mr. Kuchel, he was sentenced to 18-month good behaviour bond. His sentencing was to do with the fact that he'd failed to tell police that Mr. Wilhelm had given Diane the drug in the first place. I mean, that means fuck all. An 18-month good behaviour bond? Fuck off. Silvestri was placed on a 15-month good behaviour bond for the same offence. So there was no real consequence for any of these bastards involved in this story. Unfortunately, and I hate to say it, that's the end of the Diane Brimble story, is that actually none of these men were ever really banged to rights for what actually happened in that cabin that night. And that really frustrates me. And if you go back and you listen to, the episode where I talk about Gable Toasty and Warina and the throwing off the balcony, yes, okay, with sex, there can be drugs, there can be alcohol. I'm in no way judging that. I'm not. But when these things become mixed up, accidents can happen. That's fine. But it's not accidental to have a date rape drug on you. It's just not accidental to have that. You know what you are fucking doing if you have a date rape drug going on board a cruise ship and you invite a girl back to your cabin where there are 4 men and 1 woman. You know what you're doing. The whole thing just makes me sick. Not one of them went to prison. Not one of them has suffered for what they actually did in that cabin that night, for the state that they got a vulnerable woman into. I don't understand it. I just don't understand how that can be. I'm absolutely at a loss with that. One of the really chilling elements, and it's the final thing I'll say about this, it's just a small detail, but I don't know, this just really left an impression with me. On the day that the cruise was leaving, there is a photograph of the 8 men, and they're all standing in front of the ship, and they're posing for the camera. In the background of the photo, completely by accident and completely unknowing, is Diane. And at this point she's boarding the ship, and she just looks so happy to be getting on that ship. And these 8 men are standing looking cocky as fuck, staring at the camera, and there she is in the background. And I stared at that photograph for a long, long time, thinking about the 2 perspectives in this, and looking at them and thinking, you dickheads, you know that you are going on this fucking cruise ship and that you've got date rape drugs on you. And in the background, there's a woman who's worked really hard for 2 years to save up $5,000 to take this trip. And she's the one that's going to end up dead in this situation. That is the end of the second C story. Okay, story 3. Alright, families, they can be tough. And they can be amazing. But you know that kind of feeling you get, that sort of cabin fever feeling that you get when you're surrounded by your family for too long? Sort of Christmas, etc. You know, when it feels like everything's kind of like coming in and you're just like, I need to get away from my family. Well, imagine that was 38 days of your life stranded with your family. Imagine you were one of the people in the next story, the Robertson family. Okay, who are they? So they are Father Dougal, Mother Lynn, children Douglas, Anne, and 2 twin 10-year-old boys. Now the story goes like this. One of the younger children, one of the twins, they say to their father one day, as a child might, why can't we sail around the world? And his father says, what do you mean? And he says, well, why can we not just get into a boat as a family and sail around the world? So his father, who was an adventurous man, he thought about it and he said, yeah, why can't we? Why don't we just do that? So as a family, they sold their farm, they bought a boat, and on January 27, 1971, the family departed from Falmouth in Cornwall. They boarded a wooden schooner called Lucette. Okay? Off they went Off they went on a family adventure. So Douglas, the eldest of the sons, he says his father's planning for this journey was zero. He said, we didn't even have a practice sail. We didn't do anything before setting off around the world. That sounds like the kind of thing I'd do when I'm like, oh, I'll figure it out. Don't worry. What's that? It's just sailing. Don't worry. It can't be that hard. I'll work it out. That's one of my downfalls in life. I'm like, what's that you say? Oh, yeah, I can do that. No, I'll be fine. Douglas says, I always remember my dad at the wheel as we set sail on that adventure. He was stamping on the floor and he was shouting, yeehaw. He was living his dream. So the first part of the journey, although it wasn't easy, it wasn't terribly difficult. And as a family, they started to get used to life at sea. Over the next year, the family sailed across the Atlantic. They stopped at various points on Caribbean ports. But 17 months into their voyage, something was about to happen which would see the family run into major problems. While in the Pacific Ocean, the boat was surrounded and struck by a pod of killer whales. Douglas said the whole boat shook. There was a splintering noise and I could hear wood cracking. If you can imagine, it sounded like the sound of a tree trunk being snapped in two. There was a splashing noise and 3 killer whales were following the boat. Although I think killer whales, I don't think they're considered actually a threat to humans. Douglas obviously as a teenager felt like they were after him. I think it's actually the boat they're after, isn't it? I think it's just the idea of anything that invades their territory they're after. I mean, it may well be humans as well, but I think it's more the boat that they actually want to destroy. So the family members, they scramble on board their inflatable life raft. So it was a 10-man raft, but it could actually only really take 5 people comfortably. So it was very tight to get the entire family onto it. So the father, Dougal, he had the idea that they should sail the raft to the centre of the Pacific and catch the counter-current back to America. So between them, they had some cans of water, they had some dried bread, some biscuits, some onions, some fruit. But this only lasted them 6 days. Now after that, they had to catch rainwater in containers and they had to hunt turtles and fish to eat. Turtle blood, sounds disgusting, was pretty soon a major part of their diet. What they would do is they would catch turtles, they would kill them, they would drink the blood, and then they would dry them out and eat them as meat. After 16 days, the inflatable raft that they were in, it became unusable. They were sitting literally in puddles of water. So, I mean, there was 6 people crowded into this 10 feet dinghy, all trying to take turns to sit in the dry bit of the boat. On July 23rd, 1972, 38 days into their trip, they were finally picked up by a Japanese fishing trawler who spotted their distress flare. The family were taken to safety, they were treated for dehydration, malnutrition and sunstroke. And Douglas, who has been the most vocal of the family members, said years later, I never regretted the trip, even in the darkest hours. He went on to join the Navy. The father, Dougal wrote a book describing the event, but it was felt by the family that he never really gave them much credit for their survival, especially his wife Lynn. Now, Lynn was a nurse at the time, and she'd used her skills to keep the family alive. In actual fact, during researching this story, I read at one point that when the dinghy was getting incredibly wet, Lynn actually was the one who would spend most of her time in the water, holding on to the dinghy so that her kids could actually sit in the dry areas. But apparently in Dougal's book, he doesn't really give much credit to anyone else. I think he's like, I'm the hero in the situation. I saved everyone. Lynn and Dougal, they divorced not long after they'd been rescued. Their marriage, it couldn't really recover from what the family had to endure. Finally, Dougal says, in a funny kind of way, the life we lived in those 38 days, it had a quality to it. The quality of survival. The reward of seeing another sunset, another sunrise. We felt like wildlife. To live another day was our only goal. And that's the end of the story of the Robertson family. Okay, that's the end of the episode. Just before we go, let's go back to that 7-year-old who I asked, what is the sea? It moves all the time. It cannot stop. If it stops, everything in it will die. It's dark at night, and it sparkles when the sun is dancing on it. People think it's blue, but it's green. I'm just saying, I think that's what it's like. Let's always listen to a 7-year-old and what they think the sea is. So, get in touch. I would love to hear from you. Say hello. I'm on all the social medias. You'll find me. I'm on Patreon. Okay? If you want to, reach out to me. Say hello. And an iTunes review is always welcomed. I would love you to leave me an iTunes review if you had a spare 10 seconds. As always, you know a great story. If you know an extraordinary story, get in touch. Okay, goodbye.